For 3 years, anonymous envelopes filled with cash appeared at the doors of military families who had lost loved ones. No one knew who was behind it, until a broken security camera at Sam's Auto Repair revealed a secret that had been hidden in plain sight. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden generosity and quiet sacrifice, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The envelopes always arrived on the same day each month, the 15th, always in the early hours before sunrise, always placed carefully against the front door where they wouldn't be missed, but never where neighbors might see. Inside, crisp $100 bills, never more than 5, never less than 3. No note, no signature, just cash and a small folded piece of paper with a single line. Thank you for their service. Margaret Collins found the first one 3 years ago, 2 months after her son Danny was killed by an IED in Afghanistan. She was surviving on his life insurance and her part-time job at the local library, barely making ends meet. That envelope contained $400, exactly enough to cover her overdue electric bill. She thought it was a mistake, maybe meant for someone else. But her name was written clearly on the outside in block letters. Sarah Mitchell got hers the same day. Her husband Tom had died in a training accident at Fort Bragg 6 months earlier, leaving her with twin toddlers and a mortgage she couldn't afford alone. $300, same paper, same message. She cried for an hour, not from sadness but from relief. It meant groceries for 2 weeks. By the 3rd month, word had spread quietly through the tight network of military families in town. Someone was watching out for them. Someone cared enough to help without asking for recognition or thanks. The local VFW tried to investigate, but there were no leads, no patterns except the timing, and the fact that every recipient had lost someone in service. The mystery deepened over the years. Families moved away, new ones arrived, but the envelopes never stopped. Somehow, whoever was behind this knew exactly who needed help and exactly when they needed it most. When Jennifer Martinez's husband was deployed and she was struggling with medical bills for their daughter's surgery, an envelope appeared with $600. When old Frank Peterson couldn't afford his medications after his veterans' benefits were delayed, $500 found its way to his mailbox. The town began to buzz with theories. Some thought it was a wealthy businessman who preferred anonymity. Others suspected a veterans organization from the city. A few even wondered if it might be someone famous, a celebrity with local ties who wanted to give back without publicity. But as months turned to years and the donations continued with clockwork precision, the mystery only deepened. It was Detective Ray Morrison who finally stumbled onto the first real clue, though it wouldn't make sense until much later. He was investigating a series of minor break-ins around town, nothing valuable taken, just strange disturbances in people's mailboxes and front porches. The pattern was odd. Only military families were being visited and nothing was ever stolen. In fact, several families mentioned finding money they hadn't expected. Morrison started mapping the incidents, looking for patterns, when he noticed something interesting. Every single family that had received an envelope lived within a 5-mile radius of Sam's Auto Repair on the edge of town. It could have been coincidence. Sam's shop was centrally located and most people in town had used his services at one point or another. But Detective Morrison had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him to pay closer attention to that quiet little garage. Sam Martinez had owned the shop for 8 years, ever since he'd moved to town. He was a good mechanic, fair prices, quality work, but he kept to himself. Never married, no family anyone knew of, lived in a small apartment above the garage. He was polite enough, but he didn't socialize, didn't drink at the local bars, didn't attend community events, just worked on cars from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, and kept his own counsel. The shop itself was unremarkable, a 2-bay garage with a small office, tools that had seen better days but were well maintained, and a sign out front that had been weathered by too many storms. Sam's name was painted in simple black letters on the window, no fancy graphics or slogans. The kind of place you went when you needed honest work done and couldn't afford the dealership prices. What people didn't know was what Sam did after closing time. Every evening at precisely 6 p.m., he would lock the front door, flip the sign to closed, and disappear into the back office for exactly 2 hours. Neighbors sometimes heard sounds, not the usual clanking of tools or rumble of engines, but quieter sounds, papers rustling, phone calls made in hushed tones, the soft click of a calculator. Morrison decided to keep an eye on the garage, nothing official, just casual observation during his evening patrols. For 2 weeks, he saw nothing unusual. Sam worked late most nights, always alone, lights typically going off around 8 p.m. But on the night of March 14th, one day before the monthly envelopes were due to appear, Morrison noticed something different. Sam's truck was still in the lot at 10 p.m., but the main garage lights were off. Only a dim glow came from the back office window, barely visible from the street. Morrison parked across the road and waited. At 11:30, Sam emerged from the building carrying a small box and several manila envelopes. He loaded them carefully into his truck, looked around the empty parking lot, and drove off into the night. Morrison followed at a distance, his police training kicking in. Sam drove slowly through the residential neighborhoods, stopping at houses Morrison recognized. The Collins place, the Mitchell residence, the Martinez home where Jennifer lived with her deployed husband's children. At each stop, Sam would park, check the street for any signs of activity, then walk quietly to the front door and place an envelope against it before returning to his truck. The pattern was methodical, practiced, clearly something Sam had done many times before. Morrison watched from 2 blocks away as Sam made 7 stops that night, each one at the home of a military family who had lost someone or was struggling with deployment. The detective sat in his patrol car, watching this quiet man conduct his secret mission of mercy, and felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with police work and everything to do with humanity. But Morrison still didn't understand the full scope of what he was witnessing until 3 months later, when the security camera at Sam's garage malfunctioned. Sam had installed the camera system 2 years earlier, not because he'd had any break-ins, but because his insurance company offered a discount for businesses with security measures. It was a basic setup. 2 cameras, one covering the front entrance and parking lot, one covering the work bays inside the garage. Sam rarely checked the footage unless he needed to verify when a customer had dropped off their vehicle. The camera facing the parking lot had been acting up for weeks, shutting off randomly and recording strange shadows that weren't actually there. Sam kept meaning to call the security company to fix it, but work had been busy and he'd put it off. Finally, when the camera completely stopped working in early June, he decided to take a look at the recorded footage to see if he could figure out what was wrong. That's when Sam discovered his secret wasn't as secret as he thought. The malfunctioning camera had been recording at odd intervals, catching fragments of his nighttime activities over the past several months. There was footage of him loading boxes into his truck, counting cash at his desk, writing names and addresses on envelopes by lamplight. Most damning of all was a clear shot of him returning from his monthly rounds at 2 a.m., carefully placing an empty box back on the shelf in his office, a box labeled "Emergency Fund" in his own handwriting. But the camera had also captured something else. Detective Morrison's patrol car parked across the street, watching, waiting, clearly aware of what was happening. Sam stared at the footage for a long time that night. His secret was out, at least partially. The question now was what to do about it. He could stop the donations, pack up and leave town before anyone asked uncomfortable questions. Or he could trust that the detective who had been watching him understood something about the nature of what he was doing. He chose option 3. He invited Detective Morrison for coffee. The meeting took place on a Sunday morning at a small diner outside of town, neutral ground where they could talk without being overheard by the usual gossips and busybodies. Morrison arrived first, choosing a corner booth with a view of the parking lot, old habits from years of police work. Sam walked in 10 minutes later, looking more nervous than Morrison had ever seen him. They sat in silence for several minutes, both men nursing black coffee and trying to figure out how to start a conversation that neither of them wanted to have but both knew was necessary. Finally, Morrison spoke. "How long have you been doing it?" Sam didn't pretend not to understand. 3 years, 4 months, 12 days. That's very specific. I keep track. Every envelope, every family, every dollar. I have spreadsheets." Morrison almost smiled at that. "Of course you do. You're methodical about everything else." Another pause. Then Morrison asked the question Sam had been dreading. Why? Sam was quiet for so long that Morrison wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I should have been the one who died." The story that followed was one Morrison would never forget, and one that explained everything about the quiet mechanic who spent his evenings helping families he barely knew. Sam Martinez had been Sergeant Samuel Martinez, United States Army, 1st Infantry Division. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, more firefights than he cared to remember, and friends lost than he could bear to count. But it was his final mission, a routine convoy escort outside of Kandahar, that had changed everything. They were transporting supplies to a forward operating base when the lead vehicle hit an IED. Sam's Humvee, 3rd in the convoy, was thrown off the road by the blast. When he came to, his ears ringing and vision blurred, he could hear gunfire all around him. The ambush had been well planned. Insurgents had used the IED to disable the convoy and were now attacking from multiple positions. Sam's driver, Private Danny Collins, Margaret Collins' son, had taken shrapnel to the chest and was bleeding badly. Tom Mitchell, Sarah's husband, was in the gunner's position, laying down suppressive fire while calling for air support on the radio. In the chaos and smoke, Sam made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of staying to help coordinate the defense, Sam grabbed the wounded driver and carried him to cover behind a burned-out building about 50 yards from the road. He was following protocol, get the wounded to safety first, but it meant leaving his post during the firefight. While he was applying first aid to Private Collins, trying to stop the bleeding and keep him conscious, the insurgents flanked the convoy from the direction Sam should have been watching. Tom Mitchell died first, cut down by sniper fire while he was reloading. 2 other soldiers fell before air support arrived and scattered the attackers. When the dust settled and the casualties were counted, 3 good men were dead, and Sam was alive, physically unharmed but carrying a weight that no amount of military medals could balance. The official report cleared him of any wrongdoing. He had followed proper procedure, saved Private Collins' life, and acted with honor under fire. But Sam knew something the report didn't mention. If he had stayed at his post instead of focusing on the wounded driver, he might have seen the flanking movement in time to warn the others. Tom Mitchell might still be alive. The other 2 soldiers might have made it home. The Army disagreed. Sam received a commendation for his actions that day, a Bronze Star for Valor that he accepted but never wore. When his tour ended 6 months later, he declined re-enlistment and came home to a hero's welcome that felt like mockery. He used his GI benefits to learn auto mechanics, moved to a small town where no one knew his story, and tried to build a quiet life working with his hands. But the ghosts followed him, not supernatural spirits, but the memory of Tom Mitchell's laugh, Danny Collins' plans to propose to his girlfriend when he got home, the faces of the other soldiers who died that day while Sam lived. He went to therapy, tried medication, joined support groups, but nothing eased the fundamental unfairness of being alive when better men were dead. That's when he started tracking down the families. It began innocently enough, just curiosity about what had happened to Danny Collins' mother, whether she was okay, if she needed anything. A few internet searches led him to Margaret's address, her part-time job at the library, her struggle to pay bills on a widow's pension. Sam drove by her house one evening just to see where she lived and noticed past-due bills sticking out of her mailbox. The first envelope was impulsive, driven by guilt and grief and a desperate need to do something useful with the money he was saving by living alone above a garage. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a small attempt to balance some cosmic ledger. But when he saw how much that $400 meant to Margaret, how it let her sleep better, worry less, keep the lights on for another month, he realized he had found something like purpose. Finding Tom Mitchell's widow was harder, but military records and social media eventually led him to Sarah and her twins. Then came the other families in town, military wives and children and parents who were struggling with the aftermath of loss or deployment. Sam began to research each case carefully, learning about their situations, their needs, their dignity. He never gave so much that it seemed like charity, just enough to help them through rough patches. The money came from his savings, his military pension, and the modest profits from the garage. Sam lived on almost nothing. Military MREs he bought in bulk, used clothing from thrift stores, no entertainment or luxuries. Every extra dollar went into the emergency fund box in his office, waiting to be transformed into anonymous hope for families who needed it. Detective Morrison listened to this story in the diner booth, watching Sam's hands shake slightly as he spoke, seeing the weight this man had carried alone for years. When Sam finished talking, Morrison was quiet for a long time. "You know this doesn't make you responsible for what happened over there," Morrison finally said. Sam nodded. "I know that. Up here." He tapped his temple, but knowing something and feeling it are different things. "And you think this helps, the envelopes?" Sam considered the question. "It doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't change what happened. But it means something good comes from me being here instead of them. It means their sacrifice still matters, still helps people." Morrison understood then. This wasn't about guilt or penance or trying to buy forgiveness. This was about purpose, about finding a way to honor the dead by caring for those they left behind. It was about making sure that being a survivor meant more than just being alive. "What do you need from me?" Morrison asked. Sam looked surprised. "I thought you were going to arrest me." "For what? Being generous? Last I checked, anonymous charitable giving wasn't a crime. Some of those families might think it's weird being watched like that, following them, learning about their situations." Morrison smiled. "Sam, you're not stalking anyone. You're not taking pictures or digging through their garbage. You're helping people who need help and asking for nothing in return. If more people did weird things like that, I'd have a lot less real crime to investigate." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, two men who understood something about carrying weight and finding ways to bear it. When they stood to leave, Morrison put his hand on Sam's shoulder. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think Tom Mitchell and Danny Collins would be proud of what you're doing." Sam didn't reply, but something in his posture straightened slightly, as if a small portion of the load he carried had been shared. Detective Morrison kept Sam's secret, but he didn't stop watching the garage. Not to investigate or interfere, just to make sure Sam was okay, that the weight he carried wasn't too much for one person to bear alone. Over the months that followed, Morrison would sometimes see Sam loading envelopes into his truck and feel something close to pride. Not in himself, but in humanity, in the quiet ways people take care of each other when they think no one is watching. The monthly deliveries continued. Families received their anonymous help, never knowing it came from a man who fixed their cars during the day and mended his own broken heart at night by taking care of the people his fallen friends had left behind. But secrets, even good ones, have a way of revealing themselves. It was Margaret Collins who finally put the pieces together, though it took her 3 years to do it. She had always wondered about the timing of the envelopes. They seemed to arrive exactly when she needed them most, as if someone was watching her situation closely. More than that, the handwriting on the outside looked familiar, though she couldn't place it. The revelation came when she brought her old Honda to Sam's garage for a brake repair. While waiting for the estimate, she noticed Sam writing up the work order, his careful block letters spelling out her name and address. The handwriting was identical to what she saw every month on those precious envelopes. Margaret didn't say anything at first. She paid for the brake work, thanked Sam for his honesty about the pricing, and drove home in a daze. That night, she pulled out one of the old envelopes and compared the writing to Sam's receipt. There was no doubt. But instead of confronting Sam directly, Margaret did something unexpected. She started paying attention. Over the next month, she watched Sam's interactions with other military families who brought their cars to his shop. She saw how he always gave them the best possible price, how he sometimes found problems that didn't require expensive parts, how he treated everyone with quiet respect and never asked invasive questions about their situations. She also started noticing things about Sam himself, how thin he was, as if he didn't eat regularly, how his clothes were always clean but clearly old and worn, how he drove a truck that probably should have been retired years ago while keeping everyone else's vehicles running perfectly. Margaret realized that Sam wasn't just giving money to military families. He was giving everything he had, keeping only what he absolutely needed to survive, while making sure others could thrive. The revelation broke her heart and filled it at the same time. On a Thursday afternoon in late September, Margaret walked into Sam's garage, carrying a casserole dish and wearing an expression of gentle determination that Sam didn't immediately recognize as dangerous. "Mr. Martinez," she said, setting the dish on his counter, "I made too much lasagna and thought you might like some." Sam looked confused but grateful. "That's very kind, Mrs. Collins, but you didn't need to." "Actually, I did need to," Margaret interrupted. "I needed to thank you." The color drained from Sam's face. "Mrs. Collins, I'm not sure what—" "For the brake work last month. For always being fair with your prices. For taking care of this community in ways people don't even realize." She paused, studying his expression. "And for the envelopes." Sam sat down heavily in his office chair, looking like a man who had just been caught in something he wasn't sure was a crime. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I suspected for a while. The handwriting confirmed it last month. But I've spent the past few weeks watching, making sure I understood what was really happening here." Sam waited, unsure whether he was about to be thanked or reported to the authorities. Margaret pulled a chair closer to his desk and sat down, her movements deliberate and maternal. "Sam, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "My son Danny, did you know him?" The question hit Sam like a physical blow. For 3 years he had been helping Danny's mother without ever talking about the connection, carrying the weight of that relationship alone. "Yes," Sam said quietly. "I knew Danny." "Were you with him when he died?" Sam's hands started shaking. "Mrs. Collins, I don't think you want to hear about that." "Yes, I do. I've been waiting 6 years for someone to tell me about my son's last day. The Army gave me reports and medals and official condolences, but no one ever told me about Danny as a person, about who he was with, what he was thinking, whether he was scared." Sam looked at this woman who had lost her only child and had somehow found the strength to seek out painful truth instead of comfortable lies. He thought about the weight he had been carrying alone and realized that maybe some burdens were meant to be shared. So he told her. About Danny's sense of humor, his plans to propose to his girlfriend, the way he always volunteered for dangerous assignments to protect newer soldiers. About his courage under fire, his concern for others even when he was wounded, the way he died trying to save his fellow soldiers. And yes, about the guilt Sam carried, the feeling that he should have been able to save everyone, the way survival sometimes felt like failure. Margaret listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face, but her attention never wavering. When Sam finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Thank you," she said finally, "for being with him, for keeping him alive in your memory, for making sure his death meant something." She stood up and walked around the desk, then did something that surprised them both. She hugged Sam, this broken man who had been anonymously taking care of her for 3 years. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "You don't owe any of us anything, but I'm grateful that you chose to love us anyway." Sam cried them, for the first time since he had come home from the war. Not the angry tears of frustration or the bitter tears of guilt, but the clean tears of grief, acknowledged and burden shared. Word spread quietly through the military families in town, not as gossip, but as gratitude. Sarah Mitchell brought Sam homemade cookies and a photo of her husband Tom in his dress uniform. Jennifer Martinez invited him to her daughter's birthday party, introducing him simply as a friend of the family. Other families found reasons to stop by the garage, not to confront or embarrass Sam, but to let him know that they knew and that they were grateful. The monthly envelopes stopped coming, not because Sam stopped caring, but because they were no longer needed in the same way. The families had found something more valuable than anonymous cash. They had found community, connection, and the knowledge that someone who had served with their loved ones was still looking out for them. Sam still helped when emergency needs arose, but now it was open and reciprocal. When Margaret needed car repairs, Sam did them at cost, and she paid him with home-cooked meals. When Jennifer's husband returned from deployment, Sam gave him a job at the garage and taught him enough about mechanics to start his own business. When Sarah's twins needed rides to school, half a dozen military families organized carpools that included Sam. Detective Morrison, watching from his patrol car, saw the transformation of not just Sam, but the entire community. The secret that had started as one man's desperate attempt to manage his guilt had become something larger. A network of people taking care of each other, bound together by loss and love, and the understanding that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to care for the living. 3 years later, Sam's garage had expanded into a full-service auto shop with 3 employees, all veterans who had found their way to his door through word-of-mouth recommendations from military families. The sign out front still read, "Sam's Auto Repair," in simple black letters, but everyone in town knew it had become something more. A place where service members and their families could count on fair treatment, honest work, and the kind of respect that doesn't need to be advertised because it's simply lived. Sam never talked about his war service publicly, never wore his Bronze Star, never gave interviews about his anonymous generosity, but he had found something he hadn't expected when he started making those midnight deliveries. He had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in allowing it to create meaning in the present. On quiet evenings after the garage closed, Sam would sometimes sit in his office and look at the empty emergency fund box, remembering the weight it used to carry and the weight it had helped him release. He thought about Danny Collins and Tom Mitchell and the other soldiers who didn't make it home, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: gratitude. Not just for his own survival, but for the chance to make that survival matter. Because that's what heroes do. They don't just survive, they find ways to serve. And sometimes the greatest service is the kind that's never seen, never acknowledged, never rewarded with medals or parades. Sometimes heroism looks like a man fixing cars by day and fixing hearts by night, one anonymous envelope at a time. Some stories end with revelations and rewards. This one ends with something better: purpose. Sam Martinez found his in a small-town garage, surrounded by people who became family, doing work that mattered in ways both seen and unseen. He learned that you don't have to be perfect to be helpful, that survival can be a form of service, and that sometimes the best way to honor those who died is to live in a way that makes their sacrifice meaningful. The envelopes stopped coming, but the love behind them never did. Now I ask you, have you ever wondered about the quiet people in your community who seem to give more than they take? The mechanics and teachers and janitors who do their work with dignity and ask for nothing in return. Share their stories in the comments below, because here at Silent Heroes, we believe that every act of anonymous kindness deserves to be acknowledged. Every quiet sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us share more stories that matter. And remember, heroes don't always wear uniforms, but they always serve others. Sometimes they serve in silence, and that makes their service even more precious. Hit that notification bell, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and we'll see you next time with another story that proves the greatest power in the world is the decision to care for others when no one is watching. Until then, look around you. Heroes are everywhere if you know how to see them.